Welcome to We're Not Done Yet. I'm Elizabeth Macdonald, and with me today, the Right Reverend Dr. Richard Bott, moderator of the United Church of Canada. We're so glad that you're with us today. Thank you for joining us. This is a time of unprecedented change for all of us in the United Church as we are trying to figure out new ways of being and doing church, and as the world is living through struggling with the pandemic. What has this meant for your role as moderator? Has it changed how you do the work of moderator?
Well, the how I do the work of moderator has definitely changed. In my first 2 years in the triennium, the biggest responsibility that I was having, especially during the time of structural change for our denomination, was actually going and being in the regions to go and be parts of events, to go and be with people, to hear what was happening in their ministries. So I was doing a lot of travel, both in Canada, connecting with people in communities of faith and connecting with folks in sort of group gatherings and regional gatherings, and also in travel to meet ecumenical partners that we have in various places around the world. So a lot of that changed when flying stopped. And so I found myself having just visited a number of communities, Indigenous communities of faith in northern British Columbia, back in Vancouver, where my home is. And since the beginning of March, uh, I've connected with the church from my home. I have not been out of Port Coquitlam, and the entire way that I've tried to make those connection times has been through social media, through visual and digital connection like this, on the telephone, writing, which were parts of my ministry, but have definitely taken a much bigger lead space.
So are you finding it easier or harder to connect with us across the church, across the country?
Yes. It's a combination of the two. There's a part that I'm definitely missing in the face-to-face times, in the times where we can sit knee to knee and I can listen really carefully, and not just listen with my ears, but be able to have that entire sense of being in the space that you've invited me into. Virtual space is good in many ways, that you and I are sitting in right now, but it's a little bit more difficult for us to get sort of that gestalt of connection that happens when we're more face to face. So that's more difficult. The reality is, though, that I am able to be in a number of places all on the same day or on the same weekend. There was one weekend where I was actually helping to facilitate worship in one region, where I was offering greetings in another region, uh, and where I was taking part in a celebration of ministry service in another region. So that would have been uh, East Coast, Southern Ontario, West Coast, all within one day. That just would not have been something that we would have done if I had to travel. So
And you are certainly far from being done yourself. You've had a whole extra year added to your term with the decision to move the 44th General Council from 2021 to 2022.
Mhm. And that's meant some changes in my focus and in how I'm living into the ministry I've been given. But the reality is that ministry is exactly the same, right? The ministry that I've been called to as moderator is still the same ministry. It's just the tools that we're using to do that ministry have changed. Uh,
So what are you hearing from retired ministers, and what are you hearing about retired ministers?
well, I think in lots of ways, what I'm hearing from retired ministers is a similar kind of thing that I'm hearing from ministers who are currently in active ministry. The question of, so what is my ministry in all of this right now? Uh, the reality is the pandemic has caused us to try and understand what is it we're supposed to be doing. Many of us, and myself included, kind of have this sense of our ministry of the things that we do. You know, we prep. worship for Sunday or Wednesday night, and we prep a Bible study, and we go and meet with people doing pastoral care face to face. And on such and such a day, we head to the hospital. All those kinds of things, right? But what we found, what many ministers have found during this time of pandemic, is we can't do what we've done in the way that we've always done it. The rules and restrictions are making it very difficult to do that. So the question that I found myself asking people is, so what's your call? If you've been called to a ministry of word, sacrament, and pastoral care, or called to a ministry of education, social justice, and pastoral care, if you've been called to that ministry, go back to that and say, okay, if that's my call, how am I going to live it out in this moment with this situation in this context? Because we're in a context that's very different. Now, I want to say something about the retired folk in that. My experience of retired ministry personnel is they've already had to ask themselves that existential question of, how am I going to live the call that I have as a disciple of Jesus, as a beloved child of God, as someone who has lived their ministry of word, sacrament, and pastoral care, but still has that call, or education, service, and pastoral care, but still has that call. How am I going to do this now in this context that I don't have the work life the same way that I did, the work ministry the same way that I did? So my experience is that retired ministers have had to ask themselves that existential ministry question that those of us who are in active ministry have all of a sudden had the shock of needing to ask ourselves.
So you're right. A lot of us retired ministers have been wrestling with that question, but we're also, many of us, feeling a little bit as if the rug's been pulled out from under as the church lives into the new regional structures, as networks and clusters emerge to replace what was familiar presbyteries and conferences. So, in the newness of the emerging church, where so much is unclear and far from being settled, do you see opportunity for retired ministers? Is there a role to play?
Yes. I think that the reality is that every single one of us has the space and the place to be able to share the gifts that we have, whether or not it's in active ministry or in retired ministry, if it's in work ministry or life ministry. I think the places of transition that we have, I think there are a lot of spaces in those places. The the difficulty and the opportunity in this is that it takes each individual saying, these are my gifts, these are my abilities, I'm going to find the people that, oh, sorry, and these are my passions. These are the places that I think God is calling me to continue to live into ministry. So I'm going to connect with the people who have similar passions, who need these gifts to go and live that ministry. So I think it's actually incumbent on us as ministers of whatever category to be able to step into those clusters. And sometimes this is coming out of my studies around collegial caring, around how we as ministers come together to support one another in ministry. Sometimes it's the elder statespeople. It's the ministers who have lived a ministry and who have come to a place of retirement, but are the people who are known in a wide body of ministry as being someone who is trusted and someone that we turn to listen to us, and someone we turn to in many ways to offer pastoral care to other ministers. Sometimes it's that individual who has the ability to bring together groups of ministers who can then support one another. So I think there are a lot of places that retired ministers can continue to offer their gifts and abilities. I think the change of structure has also meant that a lot of those, the growth of those tends to be on us as ministers rather than on the structure itself.
Well, and here in East Central Ontario, We retired ministers are finding each other. We are coming together. We're very excited about the new Retirees Forum
Mhm.
that got launched in September and is beginning to explore ways of involving and engaging retired ministers in different communities and across the region. I wonder if you have a word for this brand new Retirees Forum. Might you have a hope or a dream for coming together like this? Because I suspect we're not alone. That this is probably happening in many other parts of the church. But for us in East Central Ontario, what do you have a word, a dream for us?
So here's my dream. My dream is that you get together and you do the complaining and nattering that you need to do, because we as ministers, we as people, when we get together, we need to do that. But then my dream is, my hope is that we get past that and we ask ourselves the question, okay, so what's my responsibility in this? And what's your responsibility in this? And how can we help each other to live into that? What is it that we need from each other to live into the responsibility and the joy that we have in the ministries that we've lived and the experiences and wisdom that we've gained from that, but also in the ministries that we are going to continue to live, because retired is not dead.
We are
And
far from done
exact
yet.
exactly. So for me, I think it's important for us to do the conversations that of frustration, because that's a form of lament. But then I think we need to figure out, okay, we've done that. Okay, cool. Now, how are we going to celebrate who we are as disciples of Jesus, as ministers of the United Church of Canada, active and retired? How are we going to celebrate what God is calling and what the world needs from us and what we need to hear from the world? How are we going to celebrate ourselves into that? That's my dream and my hope for your gathering and for other gatherings across the United Church of Canada.
So you've offered us a dream, you've offered us a hope. It's a bit of an invitation, a challenge. I'd like to make an invitation to you, moderator Richard Bott. Would you be willing to come back a year from now, before your term ends, and just see how life and ministry has unfolded for us here in this part of the church? Can we continue this conversation down
I
the
would
road?
I would love to hear and to interact with how the changing ministry is changing you, and how you have lived into that. So yeah, I'd love to come back in a year.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.